After completing this lesson, you'll be able to understand schedules, work with schedules, create a structural framing schedule, and calculate approximate steel tonnage. The objective domains covered are 4.2a, develop and customize schedules, and 4.2b, manipulate schedule data. Schedules can be used to report on almost all elements that are created within Revit with a simple tabular format. The schedule could report on material quantities used, or perhaps be used to understand steel section usage within a project. You can format and group and sort the schedule to present data to your exact requirements. Go ahead and open up the model 029, Developing Schedules. The model opens up in a 3D view. We'll begin by reviewing a schedule that's already been created. This particular schedule we're going to look at here is going to be the steel column schedule. In the project browser, under Schedules Quantities, go ahead and open up Steel Column Schedule. We can now review this schedule. So you'll notice here that we just simply have two rows, which means we have two types of column that are steel in the project. So we have WC1 and WC2. A very useful property with schedules is we can actually understand where we've used these in the project simply by selecting the items. So for example, if I select WC1, you'll note here I have highlight in model. If I select this, you can now see here that Revit's highlighted those columns in this particular view. If I wanted to isolate those, of course, I could come down to the View Control toolbar, select Isolate Element, and I can understand now exactly where those columns have been used. Let's go ahead here and go back to Temporary Hide Isolate, and we'll reset the Temporary Isolate. Okay, so there's a column schedule that's already been created. Now, in this particular case, we're using the structural column schedule here to mark the items and then later put this onto a drawing sheet. We're going to repeat this for structural steel framing. So we'll close down our steel column schedule and we'll now create a new schedule to represent our steel framing. To do this, select the View ribbon and then select the Schedules drop-down. On the Schedules drop-down, select Schedules Quantities. You'll notice in the filter list we're just showing structural categories, and then from the structural categories we'll select Structural Framing. Of course, here we have the opportunity of changing the framing schedule name and also the phase that we're scheduling. This entire project is all new construction, so we can leave the phase as is. Let's go ahead and select OK. We're now in the Schedule Properties dialog box. This dialog box is primarily made up of 5 tabs: Fields, Filter, Sorting and Grouping, Formatting and Appearance. In the Fields tab, we have the available fields that we can schedule, and on the right-hand side, we have the scheduled fields. The idea here is we'll move our required fields from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. So let's begin by taking across something called the type mark. This will be something that the user adds based on the type of beam. We'll then, of course, need to know the full name of the beam. That's going to be type. We'll then add the cut length through. So we'll go ahead and find cut length, and once again double click. We also want the count, so we can add that through. And what we might want to do is filter the framing schedule based on the material that we're using. To do this, you'll notice at the top here we have Select Available Fields From. Now currently we've been bringing all of our fields from the Structural Framing category, but of course here we can use other categories if we want to. Specifically here we have Structural Material. Now if we take a look at our materials in here, you can see that we've got all sorts of different things we could utilise to actually filter and understand our material. Here I'm going to go ahead and use the subclass of material. So we're now ready to look at a raw list of this data. If we click OK, you can now see that we have a tabular schedule showing all of our various different columns. We have a separate line item for every structural framing element in the project. What I'd like to do first is filter my schedule. If we have a look at the final column on the right hand side under E, you'll note here that we have some properties showing steel and other properties showing standard. The standard ones are the concrete elements and the steel ones are the ones I want to retain. To remove these from the list, I'm going to go ahead and use Filter. If you take a look at the Properties palette on the right hand side here, you'll see that we have an array of edit buttons which will take me into the relevant tab in the Schedules dialog box. So here I'm going to select Edit for Filter. In the Schedule Properties, you'll note here that we can filter by the material subclass, and I want the material subclass to be equal to steel. If I click OK, you'll now notice that our schedule's rolled up and it's only showing me the steel elements. Next, we might want to understand the smallest element in our framing schedule as opposed to the longest or largest length of element in our schedule. To do this, we could sort the schedule by the cut length. Again, in the Properties palette, you'll note here we can edit the sorting grouping. In the Sorting Grouping dialog box, perhaps here, I could sort by cut length. Now I can see the smallest element at the top here, and if I scroll down to the bottom of the schedule, here is the longest element, 92 feet. This can be very useful, particularly if we need to splice the steel to ease construction. Okay, so we're now going to turn this schedule into something we could use on a drawing. Currently, we're itemizing every single element in the project. What I want to do is now sort it by its section type, remove the cut length, and then itemize every instance off. So instead of having a single line item for every single item in the project, I'll see a count. To do this, we can go back to Sorting and Grouping, and we can click Edit. And the first thing I'm going to do here is remove Itemize Every Instance. We're going to sort by type. And I did say here that we no longer require the cut length. So we can go to the Fields tab, and we can now remove cut length from the scheduled fields. And of course, that adds it back to the available fields. We also might have the opportunity here of being able to move these items up and down the list. So I'm going to move the count right to the top of the list. We've then got type mark and type. Now you'll also notice that in our schedule visible, we have steel. Now I only really want to use this to assist me to filter the schedule. So what I can do here is go to the Formatting tab, select Structural Material, and here I can make this a hidden field. That means that the filter will still operate on this field, but it will not be visible in the schedule. And here's our schedule. Now you'll notice here at the minute, everything has rolled up and we now have a count of every item in the schedule. Again, if I wanted to use this to understand where I've used each type of steel section, I can do that. For example, here I can see that I've used 25 of these items here. So I can select the line item, select highlighting model, and here I can see those elements. And once again, if I wanted to understand that slightly better, I could isolate those elements in the view. And you can see here, these are my stub booms. Okay, let's go ahead and reset that temporary hide isolate and switch back to our structural framing schedule. The last step here is to assign each of our framing items a mark. So you can see here we have type mark. So I'm going to begin with my W sections, and here I'm going to call this one W1. This dialog box here is just telling me that I'm changing multiple elements. That's absolutely fine. Then we have W2. And then here I'll just name the rest of them B1, B2, and so on. And this one here will be B5. And finally, this one here is our flat bracing, so I'll call this one BR1. All of my structural framing elements are now marked. What I now might want to do is sort the schedule based on its type mark rather than the type. Now that I've given each type a mark, I can go back into my schedule, select Edit for Sorting and Grouping, and now we'll sort by the type mark, and then select OK. Finally, we create a calculated parameter to understand the weight of each section type. To do this, let's go back and select Edit for Fields. Again, in the Schedule Properties dialog box, you'll note here that we can add a calculated parameter. Now, there are many ways to calculate the approximate steel tonnage used in the project. In this example, I'm going to go ahead and utilise the volume of material used. So I'll bring across volume, and now I can create my calculated parameter. So I'll click Add Calculated Parameter. For the name, this is going to be weight, and this is going to be in tonnes. And then we can put in a formulae. Now you notice that we have type here, and currently I'm just going to use number. You have to be mindful here that we'll need to remove the formatting of things like volume. For example here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the volume, so let's pick volume here, and we want to multiply that by 490. The reason why we're doing this is there's approximately 490 pounds to a cubic foot. That's the volume of steel, approximately. If I just go ahead and select OK to this, you'll notice that we get inconsistent units because we have a unit here that is a volume calculation. So what we can do here is we can just divide out those units. So if I divide by 1 cubic foot in here, of course, that's absolutely fine now. If I go back and edit the parameter, you can now see that we can continue to work out our calculation. Now, what we want to do to calculate a tonne, there's 2,000 pounds to 1 tonne. So what we need to do here now is divide the whole value by 2,000. Let's go ahead and click OK. Now, if we select OK again, you'll note that we have the volume and the weight, but everything is blank at the minute. The reason for that is we've got a rolled up schedule. So of course we have to tell the framing schedule that we want to calculate totals. To do this, let's select the Edit by Formatting. So you'll notice on the Formatting tab here, if I select Volume, I can change the calculation from No Calculation to Calculate Totals. I'll do the same for my weight, Calculate Totals. You can now see we have our volumes and our weights. Now, once again, the volumes were only there to help me calculate the weight, and it might be quite nice to understand the total tonnage for all of my structural framing. So, if we go back to the Properties palette and again select Formatting, I can select Volume, and once again, I can select Hidden Field. And if I then return to Sorting and Grouping, finally, I could ask the schedule to display the grand totals. And you can now see we have a grand total, so we've got just under 21 tonnes.